Okay, hello everyone. I'm Laurie Wastell, Associate Editor at the Daily Sceptic, as some of you may know. And I was at the Lucy Connolly appeal yesterday, and I'm going to here to tell you a bit about it. So Lucy Connolly, for those of you who don't know, it's obviously become quite a cause célèbre. She is the woman who was jailed for 31 months for a tweet she sent on the night of the Southport massacre last year. And she's a mother and a childminder and really is a very sympathetic figure. And so, of course, many people are absolutely furious that she is still in prison. And indeed, not only is she still in prison, but she's being denied at the moment release on temporary license, which is the ability to go out of prison once or twice a month to care for her 12-year-old daughter and her husband, who indeed is pictured here. That's him in the middle, that's Ray. Um, and who is a Conservative councillor, which we'll get onto because that's potentially one of the reasons, as was laid out in the trial, that she was gone after in the way that she was, or rather the appeal. And so, right, so, well, what exactly happened in court yesterday? I mean, there's a lot that's interesting to get into. Um, I suppose, well, let's begin with this. Um, well, I'll take you through the whole thing, but there's interesting elements just to pique your interest, I suppose, are the fact that Lucy was crying in court at one point, which was a really heartbreaking moment, as she was telling her barrister Adam King, who was paid for by the Free Speech Union and who's very very good, um, what it had been like when she was first remanded into custody, which itself, of course, is very unusual that that happened, um, and being taken away from her daughter, and that was early on, and so yeah, this so the first hour and a half or so of the appeal was Adam basically going through everything that happened in the course of her ending up being found not found guilty, but being convicted and sentenced. And the question that was at stake essentially was whether or not she had been ill-advised by uh, her solicitor, a man by the name of Liam Muir, um, to plead guilty, and in particular to plead guilty to a very specific part of the culpability, which was um, intending to incite serious violence. And Lucy repeatedly denied that in court. She denied it again and again. And it's the question is whether she should have pleaded guilty to that, and whether indeed Mr. Muir didn't necessarily give her the best advice in and perhaps even misled her, or allowed her to believe that this was not what she was accepting guilt for in the way that she did. And so this the first hour and a half or so of the trial before lunch, the appeal, I suppose, what this was Adam talking to Lucy about that whole process, and she came across as a very sympathetic character. So let's just turn to a picture of her, why don't we? That's Lucy there. That's Ray behind. That's her daughter Edie, who's now 12. And yeah, it's just it's well, I will give you an interesting detail, which I did tweet about as well. Um, but that there were people there who had just been affected by Lucy's case because they just thought just thought it was terrible. And they're members of the public who never heard, didn't know Lucy from Adam, but nevertheless were just there because they thought, they wanted to support her. So there were three middle-aged women in front of me who said they were, yes, Free Speech Union members and massive TERFs, and they just felt really sorry that Lucy was still in prison, and they just felt the whole thing was corrupt. And yes, one of them was called Emma, and she was in fact an ex-childminder who that was why she felt particularly strongly about Lucy's case. Okay, so we had Adam doing that pretty, it was a very strong argument to be made that Lucy hadn't understood, not only firstly that she hadn't understood that this is what she's pleading guilty to, but also the other point that I'll get to more is that um, it was uh, the intent it was just very clear that she had not intended to incite violence. Okay. The second part was mostly about, and we finished, and then we went to lunch, and had a chat with Adam. He thought it was going fairly well. Uh, Right. So back we came back, and yeah. So then we had the second part, which was obviously Lucy was still there, so she was by video link. And one of the problems in the court actually was it was quite difficult to hear her, but people listening in could actually hear better. So that was all right, and I could compare notes with some of them who had better transcripts of what she was actually saying. But still, we could hear most of what she was saying, so that's fine. And this thing that I pointed to here is really a key moment that was just really. So we had just sat down after lunch, and it was over to the state prosecutor. Now he seemed relatively junior. He seemed a little bit rather more halting than Adam was. But it was his chance to basically, go state the Crown's case as to why Lucy had been punished in this way and why she should remain in prison. And there was just this extraordinary exchange, which began with him sort of trying to, uh, you know, pin her down on what exactly it meant when someone tweets. Is it an opinion? Is it a view? Is it anything else? And she was saying things like, I'm just get my notes here, in fact, but that yeah, sometimes it's a belief, but sometimes it's just what things that you're thinking that are going through your head. Sometimes you just do it, um, and I will get more into that in a second. But it proceeded from this, sort of, fair enough, sort of trying to understand what was meant by the tweet. So, of course, the charge is stirring up racial hatred, but uh, yeah, and so there has to be, and what she did plead guilty to, which she almost certainly shouldn't have, was intending to do that. And so the question is basically what was in her mind when she made that tweet. Um, and so that they had sort of gone back and forth on what a tweet in general might mean. But then came the questions about Lucy's own views and whether it reflected her views, and it became very, very authoritarian at this point, really. So or sort of trying to interrogate what her thoughts were and whether they were politically incorrect at all, is what I mean by that. And so you had, firstly, does she have strong views on immigration? And at this point, there was a ripple of kind of shock, around the court. I mean, so there's only three or four. It was a small court of appeal court, and there's only three or four benches from to watch from. But still, and they're pretty packed actually. But you could basically hear what everyone was saying. It was almost how everyone was reacting, and there was just the prosecutor was sort of more to the right, Adam was to the left, and it would just is he really asking her that? Does she have strong views on immigration? And so yes, she said yes, she does. And there were similar questions about does she? I'm not necessarily quoting these verbatim here, but a lot, her responses were very reasonable actually. That she said things like, I think that unchecked illegal migration is a national security risk. And to which the response, or not long after that, at least, the prosecutor said, "Do you think that children are not safe because of migration?" And she, I think, repeated claims about, well, illegal migration. Yes, indeed, I think that is. Um, that is, well, particularly when they're unchecked, that is a problem. And she came across as completely reasonable here, but then he sort of tried to take it even further and said, Are you saying you do not want immigrants in this country?" And she said no. um, and so, bearing in mind, Lucy is a woman who, in fact, on the day of the attack, she was working as a childminder, and her charges are like the United Nations, is the how it's been phrased, I think, by her husband. But there's there are a bunch of different ethnicities who she is tasked with childminding, and they all love her, as far as I can tell. In fact, I was talking to her husband afterwards in the pub, and he was just telling me how close of a relationship he has with many of them. And so this. really sort of nasty and penetrating questions to say, oh, are you saying that you hate all immigrants? Which was basically the line of questioning. And she was having to say no. Um, and um, like, yeah, I'm just going through my notes here, but he said, yeah, you hold a hatred of migrants, don't you? And she said, no, I don't. And and many other things. So, um, and some of this courtesy of my good friend David Shipley. But you had, where is it? Here are some more direct quotes. Um, so we have the prosecutor. Would I be correct in saying that you don't want immigrants in this country? She said, you would be absolutely incorrect. Do you feel threatened by immigrants? Not threatened personally. I believe that anyone who comes into the country should be checked and have background checks. Um, and so, yeah, there were these reasonable responses, and she just came across very sympathetically, I thought. And you could see that the Crown was trying to portray her in this way that just didn't add up at all. Now, the next part is the cross-examination of her barrister, Liam Muir, which was itself a very unusual thing to be happening at the Court of Appeal. And so the question was, how had he made mistakes in what he had advised her, and why had he made certain advices to her, and in particular this question of her pleading guilty to the maximum element of culpability within the stereotype racial hatred offence, which is intentionally doing it. So 1A was her culpability, which she didn't realise. Now, let's have a so. Well, I won't go too much into the details of this because it's going. It was a very long exchange, and it took quite a while. But basically, the point that Adam King, the barrister, let's have a look at him. That's Adam. Was trying to make of Liam Muir was that consciously or unconsciously he had thought that Lucy's best bet to um, was to plead guilty to intending to incite serious violence, but that she didn't realize what later happened was going to happen. But that she did intend it in that moment that she sent the tweet. And as we'd heard in his cross examination of Lucy, this is absolutely not what she intended. And she said this repeatedly and very clearly. Now, really, the key bit of the whole day was Adam King's summing up. And so this is where he made the case of the two. He already made some of it with the cross examination, of course, but summed up the cases for the two grounds for appeal that he was arguing on. So the first one was what we've already heard. But so it was interesting because this is itself a very unusual thing for a court of appeal to even be thinking about, because it's usually just taken as read that a defendant's plea is a defendant's plea. But in this case, he had to make the case with the judge actually questioned him a couple of times that uh, or surely even if maybe she was ill-advised to plead guilty, the judge said essentially um, that didn't mean that the judge's actual sentence was wrong, because obviously he has to sentence the plea that's in front of him. But Adam argued that wasn't quite right, and that the reason for this was um, that the judge himself could actually have taken it upon himself to determine that the offence ought not to have been in the most serious category, which is 1A, for culpability, intending to incite serious violence. And there were actually lots of factors involved there. And so that meant that the first ground, the incorrect plea, was relevant. But the second, really, in many ways, that first ground is quite possible would be ignored by the court anyway, because there will be a desire not to land the solicitor in it. But also, it's a bit of a tenuous ground in some ways one might think. But the second ground is kind of what's more obvious to anyone who's looked at the case, um, in particular at the judgment and the reasoning the judge used, and because a lot of it is very, very well, there are gaps in it, let's say. And why is that? So Adam really did a fantastic job of forensically analyzing different parts of the sentencing remarks and to point out ways in which the judge's interpretation was unfair. And so I mean, from the beginning, he makes three very important points about Lucy, um, which is that what Lucy did, which is that firstly, even you can actually go to the tweet. So I'll have the tweet here. Now we have mass deportation now set fire to all the fucking hotels for the buses for all I care. While you're at it, take the treacherous government and politicians with them. Um, and so the it's obviously a nasty tweet, but there is that key point there for all I care. And as had been demonstrated quite well earlier on, Lucy was in a real state when she wrote this because the tragedy that she suffered in her life is she lost a child at the age of about 18 months after poor NHS care. And she had PTSD after this and was on medication for a long time and anxiety and other things, and had been sort of recovering from that in recent years. She's got a 12-year-old daughter now. But nevertheless, on the day of the appalling Southport attack, that brought it all back to her. And so she was in a real state. And so there's firstly just the trauma. And she, of course, that she says in the tweet, I feel sick knowing what these families will have to endure. Um, but there's also this question of feeling that the state, the authorities have failed. And because that really was the case with the death of her son Harry, the tragic death, because she thought that he looked very ill and that he needed to stay in hospital. But the NHS doctors were saying, no, 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 he's all right. We can send him home. And she didn't agree with this, and she was insisting that he stay. But eventually, she accepted. Oh well, they're the doctors. I'm going to listen to them, and we'll take him home. And he died overnight. And so there's this sense of being failed by the authorities and of children suffering because of it. And this is all playing into the mindset that she's in when she sends this tweet. So that's the first part of lack of intent. And as she said, I think Adam quoted it. Oh, it was angry hyperbole. That's what Adam said. But he also noted that she had said in her testimony. Um, let me see if I can find it. I wasn't thinking it was emotional. And that's exactly what it was. So there was not, and he even, philosophized for a second on the concept of intent. That is a real concept. That does mean, you have a state of mind where you want a specific thing to happen. She was not in a state, in a thinking state of mind. She was just, as she later said, raging. Okay. So that's the first reason why the charge ought not to have, or what, which speaks against the fact that it was intending to incite serious violence. The second part is that in the days after this, when violence did occur, um, there she had actually she not only did she delete the tweet after 3.5 hours, she that which is itself a very important point. But in the days once riots started to occur, she tweeted several times telling people to stop, saying things like, "Oh, we need to stop rioting. This is just giving people the authorities what they want. They're playing into their hands. We need to be peaceful. This is all wrong. Stop doing this." There are several tweets to this effect, and so you have the tweet itself, you have the fact that she deletes it, and you have this fact that she's telling people to stop rioting. And so it's very this already speaks heavily against the idea that there was intent. But then we go to the judge's sentencing remarks, and what you see something I've been reporting on for really since this happened, but it was the way, in particular since the sentences came in, it's the way that everything kind of got bound up together. So you would have people being sentenced for riots, for inciting riots supposedly, or for posting things online about riots, when that post had happened after the actual riot, for instance. So how were the two supposed to be linked? There was no um, the chain of causation here is actually not very clear at all. And so this is one of the things that Adam picks up. So the judge says something along the lines of, during this time, there were some people who sowed up division and hatred and took it as a chance to do that. And this is true to some extent. There were some people who did like very explicitly encourage riots. Okay, but Lucy was not doing that. So it's not fair to say that Lucy was sowing hatred. She was simply raging, and indeed she was telling people to stop um, doing this. But also, there are other inconsistencies in the remarks. So, one of the things that really added to the aggravation, according to what the judge said, was that she had done it at a particularly sensitive social climate. Now, that is, there hadn't actually been any riots at the point at which Lucy sent her tweet, and there wouldn't be for another 2 days. So, what was it supposed to be meant by a particularly sensitive social climate? It's basically just hindsight bias, and it's folding in this particular tweet with everything that later happened. And how exactly was Lucy supposed to know in the moment that the climate was particularly sensitive? You also have uh, a strange comment, which is about supposedly further racist remarks in other tweets. Now, those that itself is a dubious characterization of those tweets, which are basically just tweets about illegal migration. But it's also neither here nor there was the case that Adam made, because um, you know, because it doesn't speak to whether or not there was intent there on that particular evening. Now, another thing that was particularly nasty and unfair in that judgment was that he criticized her for saying to a friend, once the tweet did actually go to the police, which was only, by the way, about a week or more later. And by this time, she had sent several tweets condemning the violence, and she had deleted the tweet. But anyway, um, she told a friend, "Oh, well, that tweet has bit me on the arse. I'm going to play the mental health card." Um, and and she also said "lol." But there was actually a whole discussion over this, over the meaning of "lol" lowercase, which is what it actually was, versus "lol" uppercase, which is actually how it had been um, transcribed. And that was so the point that Adam made was that it was not, unbelievably flippant. It was just just a tweet to a friend, basically. But in any case, the judge seems to have held it against her that she said she would play the mental health card. But why exactly? I mean, this is a somewhat flippant use of the phrase. But she has had mental health issues, and in fact, in the end, she didn't even make that, plead diminished responsibility or anything else. But why exactly was the judge, taking this as something that's relevant to talk about? And then a final thing is, or another thing at least, maybe there's two more, um, is that he has this phrase where he says, "Oh well, she deleted it in due course." And in due course is not really right. In due course would imply that she deleted it after it, as she said, bit her on the arse, or after a week or something, after a while. She deleted it pretty much immediately. She went out and walked the dog. She came back and made dinner, and then she thought, oh, that tweet was a bit silly. I'm going to delete that now. So again, you have a factually not quite accurate, not quite fair interpretation of events by the judge there. And so there are, yeah, and one more thing being, I mean, perhaps the most emotionally charged bit of this was when Adam was pointing out as I said earlier, um, the way that this tweet reflected her, being re-traumatized by the idea of children dying and just feeling totally distraught at the fact that the authorities had allowed this to happen, and also the fact that it very much chimed with the problem she had felt, what she almost felt responsible for her son's own death, tragically, in that she didn't speak out as forcefully as she ought to. And that this time, given that she does, as many people do feel, that illegal migration um, is a major threat to children in particular. And she had seen some of the rumors that were going around online, which, of course, the authorities were not really doing a great job at disconfirming because they weren't really releasing any information. She did think that this was represented a threat to children. In fact, I heard afterwards from her husband in the pub that so she was with a racially diverse group of childminder charges that day, and she was so terrified after hearing it on the news that she had put all the blinds up and they were all sitting together, I think on the sofa, and they were just, she was unbelievably frightened about what had happened. So there's this enormous fear, and sadness, and she's distraught about this, and this is playing into the mindset, and so none of this really was taken into account. She was just seen as a nasty racist woman, and so that's the final thing that I'll leave you with, really, is that what you got to at the end was finally you had the state prosecutor got to say his piece. It was pretty brief, and it did sort of seem like he was going through the motions a little. He didn't really respond to many of the arguments. But he came out with things basically saying this post reflected her racist views. She has a extensive hatred of immigrants, and other comments like this, which was basically saying and reflected her racist mindset, and which is just completely unfair. But you very much see the logic behind the Crown's desire to see her behind bars, which is not so much that she did, you know, cross the line into inciting violence or not, but rather that it saw her as a thought criminal. It saw her as having views that are, go against our diverse and inclusive society, as the judge said, and that this is why she was sentenced so severely. So that's really the story of the trial, I think. I mean, there's an extraordinary moment where the judge said, came, they adjourned, they came back, and they said, "Well, I'm really sorry to disappoint Lucy and her supporters, but we were all, hearts in our mouths." Uh, but no, he said there will be an adjournment until they can come back with written with a written judgment. That's what we saw yesterday, and they would, do that as soon as possible because usually the Court of Appeal doesn't have to look at so many factual matters or factual matters at all. It's just dealing with points of law, and so that they needed time to review the evidence. But in fact, now we've learned that there won't just be a written judgment; there will be a hearing, which is very interesting because that looks like, I mean, that will essentially just be a press conference where they read it out because there's not going to be any back and forth from Adam or the prosecutor. Um, and so that signals that they're taking this very seriously, I think, and because it's going to be, you know, it's going to be very difficult for them either way in some ways, because it will be admitting a tremendous miscarriage of justice if they do go after this judge in this way, frankly. But at the same time, of course, there's such immense public feeling on this issue, and it's such, she's such a sympathetic figure that if they don't, I mean, people are going to be absolutely furious. There might be, I don't think there will be riots on the streets, but it's not even beyond the realms of possibility, perhaps. Um, and so anyway, so we await that now, and anything could happen, I suppose.